In the freezing winter of 2003, a routine stop in a desolate village in Hebei province revealed a brutal execution. Inside a crumbling, abandoned house, a man lay dead, his body marking the beginning of a twisted saga involving crippling gambling debts, illicit affairs, and a cold-blooded betrayal hidden within a family. But as detectives peeled back the layers, they realized this corpse was just the first piece of a much darker puzzle. Who wanted this coal miner dead, and why? Please support our channel by subscribing as we dive into this harrowing investigation. The morning of February 16, 2003, broke cold and gray over Baoding City in Hebei province. The winter air in northern China is unforgiving, often biting through layers of clothing, and on this particular Sunday, the chills seemed to carry a heavy, ominous weight. In Mapu village, a quiet, semi-rural area on the outskirts of the city, the silence was shattered not by the noise of industry, but by a scream of pure terror. At approximately 8 a.m., a local truck driver named Wu Yang was navigating the winding roads near the village. Overcome by a sudden need to relieve himself, he pulled his vehicle over to the side of the road, spotting a dilapidated structure nearby. It was an abandoned house, locally referred to as a ghost house, a remnant of older times with peeling walls and a roof that had long since begun to surrender to the elements. Seeking privacy, Wu Yang stepped inside the ruins. What he found was not shelter, but a nightmare. Sprawled on the dirt floor lay the body of a man. The figure was motionless, surrounded by a dark, congealed pool of crimson. Panic surged through Wu Yang. He instinctively stepped closer, his hand trembling as he reached out to check for breath beneath the man's nose. There was nothing. The skin was cold to the touch. Terrified, Wu Yang stumbled backward, his screams echoing off the decaying walls and alerting the nearby villagers. Within minutes, a crowd of curious and horrified locals had gathered, their murmurs buzzing like flies around the scene until the sirens of the Baoding Public Security Bureau cut through the air. When the Criminal Investigation Unit arrived, their first priority was crowd control. In rural China, a crime scene can quickly become a spectacle, and the officers had to work fast to establish a cordon, pushing back the wall of onlookers to preserve whatever fragile evidence remained in the dirt. The lead detectives approached the body, stepping carefully to avoid disturbing the chaotic mix of footprints that already littered the floor. The initial visual assessment painted a grim picture. The victim was a male, estimated to be between 35 and 40 years old. He was of average build, standing approximately 5 feet 7 inches tall. The medical examiner noted that rigor mortis had set in, suggesting the man had been dead for some time. Based on the body temperature and the state of the blood, the time of death was estimated to be between the evening and midnight of the previous day, February 15th. The cause of death was immediately apparent and brutal. The victim had suffered catastrophic blood loss from 2 distinct, deep stab wounds, one slashing across the neck and another puncturing the left side of the chest, directly targeting the heart. The precision and depth of the wound suggested the murder weapon was a sharp, single-edged blade, likely a dagger or a hunting knife. The victim was dressed in humble attire, a plain blue t-shirt, and black trousers made of synthetic parachute fabric. The shirt was soaked in blood, which had dried into a stiff, dark brown crust. Notably, the clothing was old and worn, stained with ingrained coal dust and soot, a detail that immediately suggested the man was a manual laborer, likely a coal miner or a factory worker. On his left wrist, he wore a watch with a peeling leather strap. The fact that the watch was still there was a critical clue. It suggested that robbery was likely not the primary motive. If this had been a mugging gone wrong, the assailant would almost certainly have taken the watch and searched the pockets. Further examination of the body revealed no distinguishing marks, no tattoos, no surgical scars, and no birthmarks that could aid in immediate identification. His hair was peppered with a few strands of gray. His skin was deeply tanned from sun exposure, and his hands were thick and calloused. reinforcing the theory that he was a blue-collar worker. Curiously, the medical examiner found an old, scabbed wound on the victim's right elbow. It was dry and healing, clearly unrelated to the fatal attack, but it was a detail the police filed away for later. The crime scene itself was a forensic challenge. The floor of the abandoned house was a mess of disturbed earth. While there were numerous shoe prints, they were a jumbled, overlapping, chaotic map. Between the initial struggle, the discovery by Wu Yang, and the encroachment of curious villagers before the police cordon was fully established, isolating the killer's footprints was nearly impossible. However, just outside the house, investigators found broken branches in a nearby thicket and traces of blood on the ground, indicating the attack might have started outside before ending in the execution within the walls of the ruin. Detectives operated under the theory of a vendetta killing. The brutality of the stab wounds, particularly to the chest, implied anger or a desire to ensure death rather than a frantic struggle to escape. The victim did not look wealthy. He was a working-class man. Killing him for money seemed illogical unless the perpetrator was desperate for pocket change. 2 hours into the investigation, a strange development occurred. A middle-aged man approached the police line, claiming to know the victim. He identified himself as Mr. Guo. He told the officers that the dead man was named Luo Xiangqiang and that he lived nearby. Hopeful for a quick identification, the detectives pressed Guo for details. Where exactly did he live? Who was his family? But Mr. Guo hesitated. His eyes darted around, and his answers became nonsensical. As the detectives grew stern, demanding cooperation, a young villager in the crowd stepped forward. He informed the police that Mr. Guo suffered from severe mental illness and was known in the village for making up stories to insert himself into events. A quick background check in Mapu village confirmed that no one named Luo Zhangsheng lived there. The lead turned out to be a dead end, a phantom created by a confused mind. With no identification found on the body, the Baoding police turned to the media. By that afternoon, descriptions of the victim were broadcast across local television and radio stations, reaching the neighboring villages. The breakthrough came later that evening. A woman named Fuling, a 30-year-old resident of the neighboring Zhuozhou village, arrived at the police station. She was visibly anxious, her hands clasping and unclasping as she spoke to the officer on duty. She explained that her husband had not returned home since the previous night. When she heard the broadcast about a man in his late 30s found dead in an abandoned house wearing blue and black clothing, a knot of dread had formed in her stomach. The description matched her husband perfectly. Detectives escorted Fuling to the morgue for a formal identification. As the sheet was pulled back, her worst fears were confirmed. The victim was indeed her husband, 40-year-old Su Xuecheng. According to Fuling, Su Xuecheng worked at a local coal mine. On the morning of February 15th, he had left home at 6:30 a.m. for his shift, just as he did every day. Usually, he would return before 6 in the evening, but the previous night, the hours had ticked by with no sign of him. He hadn't mentioned working overtime. Worried, Fuling had gone to the mine to look for him, but his co-workers told her he had clocked out and left immediately after his shift ended. As the interview progressed, a darker picture of the victim's life began to emerge. Su Xuecheng was not just a hard-working miner. He was a man with deep vices. Fuling, with tears streaming down her face, revealed that her husband had a complicated and unsavory social circle. He was a habitual gambler. Instead of coming home after work, Su Xuecheng would often head straight to the underground gambling dens, sometimes disappearing from the afternoon until the early hours of the following morning. He would return home only to change his clothes before heading back to the mine, trapped in a cycle of labor and addiction. This addiction had consequences. Fuling disclosed that they were drowning in debt. Recently, a group of thugs had been terrorizing their household, demanding repayment for a significant sum Su Xuecheng had lost at the tables. These debt collectors were violent and aggressive. They had smashed furniture and threatened to throw the couple out onto the street. Then, Fuling dropped a bombshell that shifted the atmosphere in the interrogation room. She wept as she described a horrific incident where one of the debt collectors had sexually assaulted her while her husband was not home. The savagery of the collectors made them prime suspects. If Su Shuicheng had failed to pay up, it was entirely plausible they had decided to make an example of him. Armed with this new lead, the investigation team moved swiftly to identify the leader of this debt collection gang. They zeroed in on a man named Xu Zhengxing. Xu was a notorious local tough guy, known for lending money at extortionate rates and using brute force to ensure repayment. When police tracked Xu Zhengxing down, he didn't deny the debt. He admitted that Su Shuicheng owed him a large amount of money, thousands of yuan, and that the payment was nearly a week overdue. He acknowledged that he and his crew had planned to visit Su's home again to apply pressure. But, Xu said with a shrug, "I didn't expect him to die. You can't collect money from a ghost." Detectives noticed that Xu Zhengxing's hand was bandaged. In a homicide investigation involving a knife, a hand injury on a suspect is a massive red flag. Cuts often occur when a hand slips down the blade during a stabbing. They pressed him on the injury. Xu claimed he had fallen off his motorcycle a few days prior. His subordinates corroborated the story, but in the world of organized crime, loyalties are bought and lies are cheap. The police needed verifiable proof. Xu Zhengxing provided an alibi for the time of the murder. He claimed that around 7 p.m. on February 15th, the estimated window of the killing, he was with two of his associates, men named Yu and Lai. They had gone to a karaoke bar in town called Tianlin, and afterward, they had taken 3 hostesses to the Wang Chi Hotel, where they spent the entire night. It was a classic criminal alibi, but it was also one that could be checked. Investigators dispatched a team to the Tianlin karaoke bar and the Wang Chi Hotel. They interviewed the staff, checked the guest logs, and spoke to the women involved. The evidence held up. The staff confirmed Xu and his crew were there all night, drinking and singing during the exact hours Su Shuicheng was being bled out in the abandoned house. Xu Zhengxing and his enforcers were cleared of the murder charge. However, before the police released him, Xu offered another lead. He told them that Su Shuicheng was a man who borrowed money from everyone he met. "It wasn't just me," Xu explained. "He borrowed piecemeal from everywhere." Xu pointed the finger at another creditor named Xie Xiangqi. According to Xu, just 3 days prior, while drunk, she had ranted that if Su Shuicheng didn't pay up this time, he would join forces with Xu to harass Su's in-laws, Hu Fuling's parents. Detectives immediately shifted their focus to Xie Xiangqi. They arrived at his home, ready to bring him in, but Xie was nowhere to be found. His wife answered the door, looking confused. She explained that her husband was not in the city. He had traveled to Hunan province 2 days ago to attend the funeral of his uncle and had not yet returned. Police verified this through travel records and contact with relatives in Hunan. Xie Xiangqi was hundreds of miles away when the murder took place. Another dead end. Frustrated, the police turned their attention back to the victim's lifestyle. They visited the gambling den Su Shuicheng frequented, diving into the smoky, dim underworld of Baoding's illegal casinos. The picture they assembled of Su Shuicheng was ugly. He was not a beloved figure. Neighbors and fellow gamblers described a volatile, abusive relationship between Su and his wife. The marriage was a war zone. Su Shuicheng was described as a brute. Whenever he lost money, which was often, or drank too much, he would take his rage out on Hu Fuling and their child. Neighbors reported hearing shouting and the sounds of physical violence almost daily. Hu Fuling was described as a timid, frail woman who never fought back, often seen with bruises on her arms and face. This revelation forced the detectives to consider a different angle: domestic homicide. Was it possible that Hu Fuling, the grieving widow, had finally snapped? The battered woman syndrome is a known phenomenon in criminology, where a victim of long-term abuse kills their abuser in a desperate act of self-preservation. However, when detectives canvassed the neighborhood, the consensus was overwhelming. Impossible, the neighbors said. Fuling was too weak, too scared, and too submissive. She didn't have the physical strength or the psychological steel to lure her husband to an abandoned house and stab him to death. Despite the community's defense of her, the police had to be thorough. They brought Fuling back in for a second round of questioning. When the detectives gently floated the idea that she might be involved, Fuling appeared genuinely confused and flustered. She reiterated her movements on the night of the 15th. She admitted she didn't just look for her husband alone. She had help. She told police that on the evening of the disappearance, she had gone to the coal mine owner, a man named Song Bao Liang, to ask for help finding Sue. Song Bao Liang was a well-respected figure, the owner of the mine where Sue worked. Detectives brought him in for questioning to verify Fuling's timeline. Song Bao Liang was cooperative and calm. He confirmed that around 7 p.m. on the 15th, Fuling had come to the mine, frantic with worry. I told her Sue had already left. Song told the investigators. He clocked out and rushed off like he had somewhere to be. Seeing the distress of his employee's wife and knowing the family's difficult situation, Song Bao Liang had offered to drive her around to look for him. He explained that he drove Fuling to the homes of several friends and colleagues, searching until 11 p.m. When they couldn't find him, Song drove her home, reassuring her that if Sue didn't show up by morning, he would organize a search party with the mine workers. Song Bao Liang's testimony was solid. He was a pillar of the community helping a distraught woman. There was no obvious motive for him to harm his own employee. The investigation seemed to be stalling. The dead angle had dried up. The domestic abuse angle seemed unlikely given Fuling's demeanor and alibi. But detectives know that in murder investigations, the smallest detail can crack a case open. They decided to re-interview Su Shucheng's co-workers, looking for anything out of the ordinary in the days leading up to his death. A colleague named Shi Lin came forward with a piece of information that hadn't seemed important at first, but now stood out. Shi Lin told police that a few days before the murder, a young man had come to the mine looking for Sue. On the afternoon of the 15th, Shi Lin recalled, "After the shift ended, I saw Su Shucheng leaving with that same young man. This was critical. This young man was the last person seen with the victim." Shi Lin continued, "I once heard Sue say that the guy was his cousin, but he never introduced us properly. He just said they lived in the same area." Shi Lin described the mystery man. He was short, under 5 feet 3 inches, with a slight build. He wore a face mask and a hat, obscuring his features, which was suspicious in itself. But Shi Lin noticed one distinct detail: a tattoo on the man's right arm. Furthermore, the behavior between the two was secretive. They didn't talk in the common rest area. They whispered in corners, away from the other workers, as if plotting something. Police rushed back to Fuling. "Does your husband have a cousin who fits this description? Short, tattoo on the right arm?" Fuling frowned, thinking for a moment. Then recognition dawned on her face. "Yes," she said. "That sounds like his cousin, Xia Shuquan." Armed with the description of the mysterious cousin, the Baoding police immediately mobilized. The working theory was clear and compelling. Xia Shuquan, a relative with a known history of gambling and instability, had lured his cousin Su Shucheng to the abandoned house, murdered him over a financial dispute, and fled the scene. The timeline fit, the behavior fit, and the secrecy surrounding their meeting on the afternoon of the murder was the smoking gun the detectives had been looking for. Following the address provided by Fuling, a squad of officers descended on the Zia family home. However, instead of a cornered suspect, they found confused and frightened parents. Xia Shuquan's parents told the police that their son was not home. They had not seen him since the previous day. Detectives then raced to the factory where Xia Shuquan worked, hoping to intercept him there. But the factory foreman shook his head. Xia had not clocked in that morning. nor had he called to request time off. This unexcused absence was highly irregular and only deepened the investigator's suspicion that he was on the run. The police cast a wider net, visiting Xia's friends and known associates throughout the district. No one had seen him. As the hours ticked by, the profile of Xia Shuquan began to darken. Through interviews with the family, detectives learned that Shai was essentially a mirror image of his deceased cousin. He spent much of his time at Su Shuicheng's house, not for family bonding, but to gamble. Like Su, he had fallen into the trap of addiction, racking up debts across the city. There had even been incidents where creditors chased Shai to Su's home, forcing him to hide there for days at a time. Hu Fuling had reportedly tried to intervene, begging both her husband and his cousin to stop destroying their lives with cards and dice. But her pleas had fallen on deaf ears. The narrative seemed complete. A desperate gambler kills another desperate gambler. The police issued an all-points bulletin for Xia Shuquan, treating him as the primary suspect in the murder of Su Shuicheng. But just as the manhunt was gaining momentum, a dispatch call from a neighboring village shattered the investigation's momentum. While the Baoding police were scouring the city for Xia, a report came in regarding a second body discovered in a desolate open lot in a nearby village. The location was miles away from the first crime scene, yet the timing was too coincidental to ignore. 2 investigators were immediately detached from the Su task force to assess the situation. When they arrived at the vacant lot, the scene was eerily similar to the first, a lonely, forgotten place where violence had been inflicted in silence. The medical examiner was already on site, crouching over the body of a young male. The victim appeared to be roughly 25 years old, standing about 5 feet 3 inches tall. The rigor mortis indicated that he had been dead for approximately 12 hours, placing the time of death around 10 p.m. on February 17th, 2 days after Su Shuicheng was killed. The violence inflicted on this young man was visceral. He had been stabbed 3 times in the chest and abdomen. The wounds were deep, penetrating vital organs and causing massive internal and external hemorrhaging. The weapon, the coroner suggested, was likely a double-edged dagger or a similar sharp instrument. However, as the forensic team processed the body, a strange anomaly emerged. There were no defensive wounds on the victim's hands or arms. In a knife attack, instinct usually drives a victim to block the blade, resulting in cuts on the palms or forearms. This man had apparently taken the fatal blows without a struggle. The answer to this mystery came quickly. The medical examiner noted signs of deep sedation. Preliminary tests suggested a significant amount of sleeping pills in the victim's system. This changed the profile of the killer entirely. This was not a frenzied street fight. It was a calculated execution. The killer had likely drugged the victim, rendering him unconscious or severely incapacitated, before driving them to this isolated spot to finish the job. The victim was dressed in a t-shirt and shorts clothing that was woefully inadequate for the freezing February temperatures, suggesting he had been taken from an indoor location. In his pocket, police found a wallet containing a small amount of cash, but no identification card, driver's license, or documents. Once again, robbery was ruled out. The local villagers gathered around the cordon shook their heads. No one recognized the dead man. He was a stranger to this area. One of the visiting detectives, initially there just to rule out a connection, stepped closer to the body. He pulled back the sleeve of the victim's t-shirt to check for needle marks or other signs of drug abuse. Instead, he froze. There, inked onto the skin of the right arm, was a distinctive tattoo. The image of the missing cousin flashed in the detective's mind. Short stature, under 5 feet 3, tattoo on the right arm. The suspect they were hunting was lying at their feet. The police immediately summoned Hu Fuling to the scene for a second identification. When she arrived, her reaction was visceral. She confirmed that the young man lying in the dirt was indeed Xia Shuquan, her husband's cousin, and the man the police believed had killed him. The investigation was turned upside down. The Baoding Public Security Bureau was no longer dealing with a simple murder-suicide or a fugitive run. They were looking at a double homicide. Two cousins, killed 2 days apart, both stabbed to death. The police leadership made a strategic decision to merge the two cases. It was highly probable that the deaths were linked. Was there a serial killer targeting this family? Or was there a third party, a mutual enemy, who had a vendetta against both gamblers? The task force was split into 2 teams. One would continue digging into Su Shecheng's past, while the other would focus exclusively on the newly deceased Xia Shuquan. If Xia wasn't the killer, then his own life might hold the key to who was. Investigators went to Xia's workplace, the factory where he had been a phantom employee for the last 2 days. They interviewed his co-workers, looking for conflicts or grudges. They found one quickly. Xia Shuquan was not a popular man. He had recently been involved in a bitter dispute with a colleague named Xu Yan. According to witnesses, Xu Yan had accused Xia of stealing money from his locker. Xu had escalated the issue to management, demanding Xia be fired. However, Xia Shuquan denied the theft vehemently. An internal investigation by the factory security team cleared Xia of any wrongdoing, concluding that there was no evidence he had taken the cash. But the investigation revealed something else. Xu Yan had actually fabricated the theft accusation. Xu despised Xia because of his work ethic, or lack thereof. Xia was known for being lazy, slacking off on the assembly line, yet he constantly flattered and sucked up to the supervisors, earning him preferential treatment. Xu Yan, disgusted by this sycophancy, had tried to frame him to get him fired. The plan backfired spectacularly. When the truth came out, it was Xu Yan who was terminated for filing a false report. A man who loses his job because of a rival has a strong motive for revenge. Detectives tracked down Xu Yan, ready to press him on his whereabouts for the nights of February 15th and 17th. However, the lead evaporated as quickly as it had appeared. Xu Yan had a solid alibi. He had been with family members and had receipts to prove his location during both murders. He was bitter, certainly, but he was not a killer. As the workplace angle cooled, another lead surfaced from Shia's circle of friends. A close associate of Xia told police that in the days leading up to his death, Xia had been acting strangely. He had confided in the friend that he might need to lie low for a while. He didn't explain why, nor did he officially request leave from his job. He simply asked the friend to cover for him if the boss asked. Even more disturbing was a specific request Xia had made. He had asked his friend if he knew where to buy a black market gun. When the friend reacted with shock, Xia had laughed it off, claiming he just wanted to get into sport shooting and was curious. But in the context of 2 murders, the police didn't believe in coincidences. A man who thinks he needs a gun and plans to go into hiding is a man who knows he is in mortal danger. Was Xia Shuquan trying to protect himself from the same person who killed his cousin? Or was he planning an attack of his own? The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a neighbor of the Xia family named Wang Mei. In rural villages, neighbors often see everything, and Wang Mei was no exception. She approached the investigators with a piece of gossip that she felt was too important to keep to herself. "I saw something," Wang whispered to the detectives, "something unnatural." She claimed that on several occasions, she had seen Xia Shuquan in a romantic embrace with a woman, but it wasn't a girlfriend or a stranger. He was hugging and kissing his sister-in-law, Wang said, her eyes wide. Hu Fuling. The accusation was scandalous. In a traditional Chinese village, an affair between a man and his cousin's wife is a profound taboo. Wang Mei explained that she had been so shocked by what she saw that she had actually gone to Xia's parents to report it. But Xia's parents had dismissed her, accusing her of having bad eyesight and spreading malicious rumors. "How could my son do that with his sister-in-law?" They had scoffed. But Wang Mei stood her ground with the police. "I didn't see it once," she insisted. "I saw it 3 times. They were intimate. They were lovers. This testimony shifted the entire axis of the investigation. If Hu Fuling and Xia Shuquan were having an affair, the dynamics of the murders changed completely. The grieving widow was no longer just a victim of a bad marriage. She was potentially the center of a deadly love triangle. Detectives immediately returned to Hu Fuling's home. They had questions that needed answering about her relationship with Xia, about the timeline, and about why she had pointed the finger at him so readily when the police first asked for suspects. But when the police cruiser pulled up to the small house, they found the front gate padlocked from the outside. The windows were dark. A neighbor, peering out from next door, told the officers that they had missed her. "She left a little while ago," the neighbor said. "She was dragging 2 large suitcases. She looked like she was in a tearing hurry." The police raced to Hu Fuling's parents' home, hoping she had gone there for support. She hadn't. They checked with her friends and known associates. No one had seen her. The realization hit the task force hard. Hu Fuling was running. Her disappearance, timed perfectly with the revelation of the affair, was a tacit admission of guilt. The fragile, battered wife was a facade. The Baoding Public Security Bureau immediately initiated a citywide manhunt. Descriptions of Hu Fuling were dispatched to every train station, bus terminal, and highway checkpoint in the region. They knew that if she managed to leave Hebei province, finding her in the vastness of China would be like finding a needle in a haystack. The dragnet tightened. Police officers scanned the crowds at ticket counters and waiting rooms, looking for a woman traveling alone with heavy luggage. 12 hours later, their diligence paid off. At a long-distance bus station on the edge of the city, officers spotted a woman matching Hu Fuling's description, trying to board a sleeper bus bound for the south. She was nervous, constantly checking over her shoulder. As the officers approached and asked for her identification, her composure collapsed. Hu Fuling was taken into custody. In the interrogation room, stripped of her avenues for escape, the grieving widow began to tremble. The demeanor of the innocent victim evaporated, replaced by the anxiety of a cornered criminal. For 2 hours, the detectives grilled her. They laid out the inconsistencies. The affair with Xia Shuquan, the death of her husband, the mysterious drugging of Xia, and her sudden attempt to flee. Finally, the dam broke. Hu Fuling lowered her head and began to speak. "I didn't want it to end like this," she whispered. She began to recount her life story, a tale that started in 1972 in the rural poverty of Zhuozhou. Her parents, struggling to make ends meet, had raised her with a singular, driving philosophy: marry well. They drilled into her that her only escape from a life of hard labor was to find a husband with money. It didn't matter if she loved him. It mattered if he could provide. Young and beautiful, Hu Fuling had her pick of suitors. But following her parents' pragmatic advice, she rejected the young men she actually liked and instead accepted the proposal of Su Shuicheng, a man 10 years her senior. On paper, he was a catch handsome, and from a family rumored to be wealthy, but the marriage was built on a lie. After the wedding, Hu Fuling discovered the bitter truth. Su Shuicheng's wealth was a mirage. His parents were simple livestock traders, not business tycoons. Su himself was lazy, entitled, and unemployed, content to live off his parents' meager earnings. The dream of a life of luxury shattered instantly. Instead of being a pampered wife, Hu Fuling found herself trapped in a nightmare. Su Shuicheng was not just poor, he was cruel. His frustration with his own failures manifested in gambling and violence. When he lost money, he drank. When he drank, he hit her. For years, Hu Fuling endured the beatings. Her body was a map of bruises, her spirit slowly eroded by the constant abuse. 2 years into the marriage, she gave birth to a son, Su Xiaochun. She had hoped that fatherhood would soften Su, that the responsibility of a child would force him to grow up. She was wrong. Su Shuicheng grew worse. He viewed the child not as a blessing, but as another mouth to feed, another burden. He cursed the boy, ignored him, and continued to terrorize the household. Desperate to keep the family afloat, Hu Fuling had to send her infant son to live with her parents so she could work odd jobs. She considered divorce constantly, but in a rural village in the 1990s, divorce was a stain on a woman's reputation. She feared the gossip, the social ostracization, and the terrifying prospect that no other man would want a divorced woman with a child. So she stayed. She endured until the year 2000. That was the year everything changed. That was the year she met Song Baoliang. Song was everything her husband was not. He was older, established, and genuinely wealthy, the owner of a coal mine. When Hu Fuling approached him to beg for a job for her husband, Song looked at her not with contempt, but with desire. He was captivated by her beauty and moved by her obvious distress. To get closer to her, Song hired Su Shucheng. It was a kindness that Su repaid with his usual incompetence. Even with a steady job, Su continued to drink, gamble, and beat his wife. One afternoon, after a particularly brutal beating, Hu Fuling broke down in front of Song Baoliang. She showed him the bruises. She told him about the hell she was living in. Song was furious. He promised her that if she were his, he would treat her like a queen. He offered her the tenderness she had been starved of for a decade. It was a seduction born of desperation. Hu Fuling fell into Song Baoliang's arms, starting an illicit affair that gave her a glimpse of the life she had always wanted. Song was generous, buying gifts for her, and, crucially, showing affection to her son. But the tragedy that would seal Su Shucheng's fate was just around the corner. One cold evening in late 2000, young Su Xiaochun fell ill with a high fever. Su Shucheng was home, supposedly watching the boy, but when his gambling buddies called, the addiction took over. He left his sick, feverish son alone in the freezing house to go play cards. When Hu Fuling returned from work late that night, she found her son unconscious. Panic seized Hu Fuling. She frantically dialed Su Shucheng's number over and over, begging him to come home and take their son to the hospital. But the phone just rang. Su was deep in a gambling trance, oblivious to the world outside the parlor. Desperate and out of options, Hu Fuling swallowed her pride and called her lover, Song Baoliang. Song answered immediately. Without hesitation, he drove to her house, scooped the unconscious boy into his arms, and raced to the nearest hospital. But it was too late. The fever had raged unchecked for too long, and the child's small body, weakened by malnutrition and neglect, could not fight back. The doctors did everything they could, but Su Xiaochun passed away that night. The death of the child severed the last thread of humanity in the household. When Su Shucheng finally returned, reeking of alcohol and smoke, he didn't mourn. Instead, his parents turned their grief into a weapon, blaming Hu Fuling for the tragedy. They accused her of being so obsessed with making money that she had neglected her duties as a mother. Shortly after the funeral, the secrets began to spill. Su Shucheng discovered his wife's affair. The humiliation of being cuckolded, combined with the loss of his son, turned him into a monster. He quit his job at the mine in a rage and locked Hu Fuling inside their home, forbidding her from stepping foot outside. For weeks, the house became a prison. Su drank heavily and beat her daily. One night, after a particularly savage assault that lasted for hours, Hu Fuling lay on the floor, bleeding and broken. She whispered that she wanted a divorce. Su Shucheng laughed. He leaned over her, his breath foul with liquor, and delivered a chilling ultimatum. He told her she would never leave. Her purpose now was to serve him and to bear him another son to carry on the family name. If she refused, or if she tried to run, he promised to slaughter her entire family, her parents, her siblings, everyone she loved. This was the breaking point. The woman who had endured years of abuse finally snapped. Lying on the cold floor, Hu Fuling decided that if she wanted to live, her husband had to die. She managed to contact Song Baoliang, crying and pleading for him to save her. She told him that Su was going to kill her. Song, who had grown to love Hu Fuling and despised Su for his brutality, agreed to intervene. Initially, they didn't plan murder. Song hired a group of local thugs to ambush Su Shuiqing and beat him severely, hoping to scare him into submission. Su was hospitalized twice with severe injuries, but the beatings didn't break him. They only made him sharper. Lying in his hospital bed, Su deduced that his wife and her lover were behind the attacks. Instead of going to the police, he saw an opportunity. Upon his release, Su Shuiqing approached Song Baoliang with a proposition. He told Song that he knew everything. He offered a deal. If Song gave him 5,000 yuan, roughly $600 to open a small shop, he would grant them a divorce and allow them to be together. Relieved, Song Baoliang paid the money immediately. He and Hu Fuling believed their nightmare was finally over. They thought they had bought their freedom, but Su Shuiqing had no intention of letting them go. The shop was a front. The money was funding a darker purpose. Su was plotting a double murder. He planned to lull them into a false sense of security and then kill both Hu Fuling and Song Baoliang to wash away the shame of the affair. To execute his plan, Su needed a weapon. He turned to the one person he thought he could trust, his cousin and gambling partner, Xia Shuquan. Su confided in Xia, telling him the entire plan, and asked him to use his underground contacts to buy an illegal firearm. What Su didn't know was that he had made a fatal miscalculation. Xia Shuquan was not a loyal cousin. For months, Xia had been watching Hu Fuling from the sidelines. He had seen her suffering, and amidst the chaos, he had fallen in love with her. The sister-in-law relationship that the neighbor Wang Mei had spotted was real. Xia was infatuated with Hu Fuling's beauty and vulnerability. Faced with a choice between his blood relative and the woman he loved, Xia chose the woman. He went straight to Hu Fuling and revealed Su's plot to kill her. The revelation terrified Hu Fuling. She realized that as long as Su Shuiqing was alive, she was a dead woman walking. She went to Song Baoliang and told him the truth. Su was not going to divorce her. He was buying a gun to execute them. The dynamic shifted instantly. It was kill or be killed. Song Baoliang, terrified for his own life, agreed to fund a hit. Through underworld connections, they found a man named Li Yong, an ex-convict who had served time for theft. Li Yong agreed to murder Su Shuiqing for 10,000 yuan, about $1,200. But Su Shuiqing was paranoid. After the previous beatings, he was constantly on guard, never walking alone in dark places. The hitman, Li Yong, couldn't find an opening. Growing desperate, Hu Fuling devised a cruel and brilliant plan. She would use the cousin, Xia Shuquan, as the bait. She promised Xia that once Su was out of the picture, she would be with him. Blinded by love, Xia agreed to betray his cousin. On the afternoon of February 15th, Xia Shuquan told Su that he had found a gun seller who agreed to meet in a secluded spot, the abandoned ghost house in Mapu village. Su, eager to get his hands on the weapon, followed his cousin without suspicion. When they entered the ruin, Li Yong was waiting in the shadows. As Su stepped into the dim room, Li Yong lunged. The attack was swift and brutal. Su Shuiqing was stabbed in the neck and heart, dying on the dirt floor of the abandoned house. Xia Shuquan watched his cousin die, but instead of relief, he felt a crushing wave of guilt and terror. The reality of murder was far worse than the fantasy. In the days following the killing, Xia began to unravel. He called Hu Fuling, crying, and told her he couldn't live with the guilt. He suggested that they should all go to the police and confess, hoping for leniency. This was the moment Hu Fuling truly transformed. The battered wife was gone. In her place was a cold, calculating survivor. She knew that if Xia surrendered, he would drag her and Song Baoliang down with him. Xia Shuquan was no longer an ally. He was a loose end. She contacted Song Baoliang and Li Yong. "He's going to talk," she told them. "We have to silence him. On the evening of February 17th, 2 days after the first murder, Hu Fuling invited Jia Shuquan to a celebration dinner. She told him they needed to meet one last time before she could run away with him. Xia, still delusionally in love, arrived at the meeting spot. Hu Fuling had prepared a meal laced with a heavy dose of sleeping pills. She also encouraged him to drink alcohol, accelerating the effect of the drugs. As they ate, she spoke softly to him, making promises she never intended to keep. Within an hour, Xia's eyes grew heavy, and he slumped over, unconscious. Song Bao Liang and Li Yang emerged from the shadows. They loaded the unconscious man into a car and drove him to the desolate lot in the neighboring village. There, in the freezing darkness, Li Yang stabbed the sleeping man 3 times in the chest. They left his body in the dirt, believing they had committed the perfect crime. They had eliminated the abuser and the witness. But the web of lies unraveled quickly. Once Hu Fuling was in custody and confessed, the dominoes fell. She gave up the locations of her accomplices. Within days, police tracked down Li Yang, hiding in Tianjin, and Song Bao Liang in Shanxi. Both men were arrested without incident. Faced with Hu Fuling's detailed confession, the men turned on each other, but the story remained consistent. The police recovered the murder weapons based on their directions, sealing the case. In November 2003, the Baoding Intermediate People's Court handed down its verdict. Song Bao Liang, the wealthy mine owner who let lust and fear drive him to finance 2 executions, was sentenced to death. Li Yang, the hired blade who killed 2 men for a few $1,000s, was also sentenced to death. Both men were executed on April 28, 2004. Hu Fuling, the mastermind who orchestrated the destruction of her entire family, received a death sentence with a 2-year reprieve. In the Chinese legal system, this is a unique sentence that is typically commuted to life imprisonment if the prisoner shows good behavior during the 2-year waiting period. The court recognized the severe, long-term domestic abuse she suffered as a mitigating factor, sparing her from immediate execution, but condemning her to spend the rest of her life behind bars, haunted by the memories of the husband she hated, the lover she used, and the cousin she betrayed. This case serves as a grim reminder of how quickly the human heart can turn from love to hate, and how the search for freedom can sometimes lead to the ultimate imprisonment. It was a tragedy where 5 lives were destroyed: the innocent child, the abusive husband, the lovesick cousin, the manipulated lover, and the woman who started as a victim and ended as a villain. What do you think was the true turning point in this case? Was Hu Fuling justified in her initial plan to kill her abusive husband, or did she cross the line the moment she decided to murder the cousin who saved her? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this case compelling, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the world's most shocking criminal investigations.